monkey wrenches at us, right?
Absolutely.
It makes it not work. So,
it keeps us on our toes, right? Like that's the way I like to look at it.
right. Exactly.
So
it's working now, though.
Yes. And so I'm looking forward to this. So how's your day been?
It's been interesting. It's been fun.
Oh, that's right. Because it's pause. So it's not only the fact that you are connected so deeply with this stuff. It's the fact that you really care a lot about it, and you're really sort of knowledgeable, and you sort of bring that forward, and you're so willing like to help so many other people sort of understand. So, like I've said before, you and other community leaders who are doing the right thing, fighting the right fight, I definitely sort of want to be out here giving you and others the opportunity not only to learn what's going on, but also to get in there and sort of help out. So that's what this is all about. And with that, let me sort of share my screen and let us begin. So I just want to give a little background on One Bayview and One Bayview Speaks. So my personal mission is all about empowering people and communities to manifest their true potential and experience extraordinary success. It's really interesting. It took me a long time to sort of come up with it, and then it just hit me. And then I had to run from it for like a little bit. But when it comes to personal mission and goals, like that's like the right area to like to play in. And for those who know me know that community is actually really important to me, and thinking about things differently and helping people who sort of want to get out there. If they do want to help, they might not have the time. It's my belief that we have all the resources that we need if we focus. And so this is really sort of why I'm sort of putting this forward. And another reason why I do this, one, I think it's the right thing to do. And two, let me tell you, my biggest pet peeves are meetings that happen during the day and either political officials or other people act as if people who don't show up don't care. That just makes me so angry. I can't even tell you. And I've been in a number.
We complain about that all the time. That is a huge pet peeve for environmental justice activists.
Absolutely. And it's not just environment, it's politics, it's public education. This stuff happens all the time. And then there's a mistaken belief that people don't care. People care. It's just, I work. Right. And I can't even tell you how many times I've called people to task on it, and to watch them backtrack when there's someone in the room who has a modicum of freedom to sort of stand up for those of us who are sort of working or taking care of our families. And this is, being an elected official or working for a nonprofit or, even working for a company. If you have meetings during the day, just, we can't do it, but we do care. And of course, there's so many of us who want to improve our homes, our blocks, our parks, and our communities, just like you, Michelle, that I'm really just excited about this whole thing. So we do a number of things. We have our One Bayview Insider, which is a newsletter that we share about what's good in the Bayview Hood. We are actually revamping that now, connecting it to our website, which makes us really happy. And it's really all about connecting all the members of the community and beyond in meaningful ways to help transform our community. And this really came out of this whole idea that, again, people are busy and people are putting events in various places and no one knows where to go. And so with my day job, and I do a lot of marketing consulting, for social impact firms and companies, et cetera, being able to bridge that gap between community and what people need is actually really important to me. So this is just one way of doing it. We also do specialty campaigns. We did the Shop Bayview a few years ago, Shop and Dine Bayview. There's Iskander at Radio Africa. Love him. Holding up a sign, just proving that he wants to, he really wants to promote shopping in Bayview. This is one of the things that we did like a while ago, and we continue to do and promote, because we really do believe that our businesses are extremely important. But, and I'm just going to say this, not as important in every single one of my neighbors. Because without neighbors, then, who's going to buy and shop there? And of course, we have our website coming up. Please stay tuned. We are going to be turning this on full force very soon. We've been doing a lot of great work and just working with a lot of good people on what they need. And Michelle and I have been talking. We're not going to discuss it today, but hopefully sometime very soon. And then lastly, of course, One Bayview Speaks was a webinar series addressing issues of concern in the 94124. and sharing solutions, right? It's really important to me that, you know, we're in this day of, American Idol, where only a few get to be on stage, but there's so many people up on stage doing the right thing. And so I'm really using this as a way to give them all a voice to get things out so people know what's going on. I envision a Bayview where everyone is really well informed. Everyone can make a decision about the things that are really important. No one moves like around and says, hey, I didn't know. And so, for whatever reason, and I want this to be a conduit to sort of really help and shape and connect us. So with all that, why are we here today? There's so much going on in environmental justice in the Bayview, and I am so excited. Sorry.
Yep.
Give me 1 sec. I'm going to do like a little. I made a mistake on this one.
It was fine. I was going to start telling you about air quality, but
that's the next one.
That is the next one.
Give me 1 sec. And it's Bayview Advocates, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, great. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go back and we'll deal with some of this in post-production. I love it. So just to share, we do a lot of specialty campaigns. This is one example where we worked with, we developed sort of Shop Bayview a number of years ago during the holiday season to help promote people getting just to know the local corridor. And of course, here's Iskender at Radio Africa Kitchen. We love that place. We love this guy. There's so many great restaurants and also businesses in our district, and we just don't have a chance sort of get to know them, right? People go from point A to point B, and we just sometimes forget. And so we use campaigns like this to sort of help promote people knowing more and sharing stories and building a stronger community. And then last, we have our onebayview.com website that's coming up. It'll be a website and mobile app to sort of connect community members around great things. We've been working on this for a while, sort of on and off, as a labor of love and passion of ours, sort of go along with One Bayview Speaks and the One Bayview Insider. And that's going to be sort of launching soon. I'm looking forward to working with some great community folks like Michelle and others to really sort of spread the word and do some really amazing things. And of course, One Bayview Speaks is a webinar series that addresses a lot of issues just in our neighborhood, and not only Bayview, but in 94124, and sort of take a look at our interconnection with the rest of San Francisco. And I just want to make sure, a lot of people are having different conversations, different neighborhoods are having different conversations, different neighborhoods have different amounts of resources. And I just want to make sure that Bayview is at the table at every single one of those conversations, and that you and I, not only as sort of host and speakers, but also our neighbors, just know what's going on so that everyone can be well informed, no matter what. And then it really sort of brings me to this whole reason why we're here today and today we're really sort of focusing in on environmental justice. And specifically, we will be actually talking about biomonitoring with a really just amazing ED in our neighborhood, Michelle Pierce, who is in charge of the Bayview Advocates. And with that, Michelle, I would love you to share more about who you are and what you do.
Wow. So I am Michelle Pierce. I am the executive director of the Bayview Hunters Point Community Advocates. I am a legacy activist in environmental justice, third generation around social justice and equity. My grandfather took my mother to walk precincts for Joe Alioto back in the 50s, just to let you know. So we've been doing this for a really long time. a lot more famous around these issues is my mother, Karen Pierce, and she joined on as pseudo counsel to form this organization that has an offshoot of the Baby Hunters Point Democratic Club back in the late 80s. So there were some activists currently still on my board, Olin Webb, Oscar James, fascinating stories on those guys. Hopefully in future we will have them in as guests and get them to talk about the founding of the environmental justice movement in Baby Hunters Point. These guys are amazing. Yeah, we talked about the fact that they started the first co-op for Bayview Hunters Point, grocery co-op, back in the mid-70s, and have been doing this kind of work ever since. So they will feature very large in my conversations. Oscar James, Olin Webb, Karen Pierce, Neil Hatton. Those are my go-to, my board, my team. And I was doing this work, got into this work because I was studying biochemistry and kept getting asked to translate technical documents. Highly scientific people would show up and say, yeah, we'll give you information, but you won't understand it. And then we make it so that nobody can understand it, including the regular neighborhood folk who wanted some feedback on what was going on in their neighborhood. And a little bit more on that when we get into the presentation. But so since I was studying science, I kept getting these god-awful reports, and people would say, can you make that so I can understand it? And I would translate it into regular speak, right? So did that for a little while, put myself through school doing that and some other things. And went away to business school, came back, was acting as a consultant on equity, social responsibility, sustainability, and kept getting drawn into these EJ conversations by current activists who are saying, all this is going on in Bayview, you have to come to this meeting and help us. Give us some more of that regular speak on all this science that's coming at us. And I have to say that a lot of the activists at this point have a lot of scientific sophistication. So it's very rare that you can say stuff over their heads. What we really need to train for is the kind of fluency which will allow community to respond, because community understands what's going on now. And they understand what the scientists, government, industry is saying to them. We need to be able to respond in a way that forces scientists, government, community to respect our responses and let us in the door. So what was happening back in the 90s was we couldn't get in the door. Then they started letting us in the door because they assumed we didn't know what they were talking about, much less what we were talking about. Once we started really understanding how their systems worked, we got pushed back out of the door, right? And they brought in other people who didn't understand what was going on or didn't want to understand what was going on. We need to be let back into the room and given equal power and equal clout at the table when these decisions are being made. So as I came back and started attending the DJ things, I realized I was spending more time doing that than consulting, and was like, you know what, I need to relaunch this nonprofit. It was super powerful in the 90s and early aughts, and we need to just go on ahead and do it because there's such a critical need for it. So that's my long-winded story, and this is how we find ourselves. This is how we find ourselves back in this place. And with this technology, which means greater reach for all of those people who can't attend meetings for whatever reason, they're in the middle of the day or they're in the evening and you have your kids and we're not offering childcare or we're not offering dinner and you got to feed everybody, or you're just tired and brain dead and need to check out, but you can check back in on Saturday, right?
Yep.
We all have that. We all have that. And all of those things are critical. So absolutely.
Thank you so much, Karen, for Michelle, for
I'm
that.
Michelle.
I know.
I always get called Karen. It's okay.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for that. And again, and we said this sort of before the whole thing started. Michelle and I actually met a long time ago when I was like walking down like 3rd Street or the district, just trying to get feedback on like different things. And because it was really important to me just to sort of go from place to place, actually talk to our own neighbors, like about things. And then again, we sort of met up and she's in this role. I'm going, oh my gosh, you were just amazing. And so I just want to say thank you, not only for all the work that you have done, for the work that you continue to do, being on here with us and sort of working, sort of moving forward. I know there's a lot going on. You have a lot of information. There's a lot of other things that we don't always get to know about, that you're sort of privy to, being a Bayview advocate and the ED of that organization. So we're looking forward to sort of continued discussions. But coming back, just want to talk about biomonitoring. And this is all about biomonitoring explained. And just as, just a neighbor, what does biomonitoring mean?
Right. So biomonitoring is the technical term, and technically this term does not exist. But back in the late 90s and early aughts, a lot of toxicologists and environmentalists and environmental justice activists were talking about this thing called the body burden. I actually think body burden makes a lot more sense, because that's exactly what we're studying, right? So your body, all of our bodies are a whole bunch of chemicals come together and working in cooperation. And biomonitoring is just a peek under the hood at everything that is accumulating in your body that is not normally under pristine conditions found there, and how they are interacting in your body and how that is affecting pretty much everything, who you are, like your personality, your health, your energy, all of that stuff. And it came to be called the body burden because people started realizing that traditional toxicology was not quite doing it in terms of how we understood how exposures to regular chemicals was affecting our bodies. We went through this time in the 50s, 60s, and 70s where there was the chemical revolution and chemistry was going to save everything, right? Mm-hmm. But nobody was really paying attention to how is this affecting us beyond convenience. And it turns out that some things, traditional toxicology says there is a point where 50% of any given population will die if they're exposed to a certain thing, a certain chemical. And based on that, we will determine what is toxic and what is not. Well, you have to have really, really, really large amounts of things in order to have bad stuff happen. Some chemicals are super duper duper toxic and you don't have to have a lot, but you still have to have a significant amount. What scientists started discovering in the late 80s and really started coming to the public in the mid 2000s was that smaller molecules, so less exposure, micro exposures and pico exposures, actually affect the body in very dramatic ways that none of us had considered. So they don't kill you. They don't kill you. But they disrupt hormones and neurological processes in all kinds of crazy ways that nobody has been taking into account. And we're going to get into air quality monitoring next. So my best example now, since it's in the news and it's everywhere, and we have a lot of studies that are coming out, is carbon particulates, small carbon particulates, right? We've known that exposures to small carbon particulates can cause heart disease, breathing issues, all kinds of crazy. And recently, just last week, it came out into regular press that studies have found those carbon particulates embedded in heart tissue and heart cells, all the way into heart cells, in people as young as 3 years old in Mexico City. They've also found them embedded in people's brains. And so is this one of the reasons that we're seeing higher incidence of heart disease? Scientists have pretty conclusively said yes. We know that this causes heart disease across the board: high blood pressure, breathing issues, congestion, heart attack, stroke. The brain issue is fascinating because not just Alzheimer's, but all kinds of late onset dementias are on the rise. And is this simply because we're living longer? Possibly, but if this stuff is actually embedding itself in neurological pathways, what's the likelihood that this is also affecting that? And so these are the kinds of things that we're looking at when we say biomonitoring writ large. It's not the kind of things that we're studying directly right now. We are not equipped with the amount of funding that would allow us to actually invest in equipment and do that kind of survey. But we're looking at basic toxins, particularly starting around places that we know are really bad. And this presentation that I'm about to give you guys actually explains why we need biomonitoring at this point in time and some of those exposures that you might encounter as you go around the neighborhood that you're completely not aware of. You would have no idea. None of us would have any idea. And so who knows? Some of this stuff, it's small. You don't see it for a really long time. It might take 5 years or it might take 40 years for your body's system to be out of whack enough for you to realize this thing is affecting you. So
wow,
that's why we do this.
That's a lot. So in essence, well, that is just a lot. All right. So putting it in my own words, let's see if I can even get like a piece of this. There are chemicals that are out there in our environment. This can go anywhere, right? That actually do get embedded in very small doses into our various parts of our bodies, and that they do have an effect. And so what you're putting forward is, hey, let's actually test for this specifically here in the Bayview, because we have a lot of not only the mundane stuff, but a lot of other stuff sort of going on.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So thanks for that, because I would not have known, one, that this was an issue. And I'm sure that you'll sort of help us follow up with some reading that we can just do and some next steps. But wanted to advance some of the slides. Just tell me when.
Okay, so yeah, some history. So let's stick on this one. 1994 to 1997, SF Energy, so the city grid and the city electricity provider, it's kind of like, we have SFPUC, Public Utilities Commission. That's the wastewater treatment company. SF Energy for San Francisco was like the California PUC, which directs all of the energy issues in the city and assigns priority and electricity for all the providers. We have a couple of providers in the city of energy. So SF Energy was going to contract to add another power production plant in Bayview Hunters Point. And this sounds really weird to people now because of what this particular action in 1994 sparked. We don't have power plants anymore in the city. And it was as a result of this fight. SF Energy wanted to add more power production because the city needed more power. We continue to grow, as most people know. And they decided that they wanted to site it in Bayview, where, surprise, surprise, the 3 other power plants were already located. A consortium of community groups came together to fight this, because why do we need another one? Why can't somewhere else in the city house another power plant? Or there are some communities that have absolutely no power plants in their vicinity, and yet they still have all the electricity they need. So why did it have to be here? And this consortium said, we already have too much stuff going on, not just power plants, but everything that you guys have allowed to be put here. Anything that's dirty and nobody else wants to admit exists gets hidden in our neighborhood. And we did a toxic inventory. We threw that toxic inventory into the face of city government, the supervisors, and when they saw the level of toxic burden in this neighborhood, they were so astounded that they agreed that the issue needed to be studied, number one, to validate what community had come up with, but number two, that it was an undue, unfair burden, and the community had a right to protest. Now, that lasted until about mid-2006, and then a different argument came up, but up until about mid-2006-ish, we were able to actually use this toxic burden inventory to fight a lot of things coming into the neighborhood. So next slide. So I said that a consortium of community groups got together. That consortium was called SAGE. It is the Southeast Alliance for Environmental Justice. It was. We are no longer active. There are some discussions about reforming SAGE because we have a lot going on again. It was the first community-directed focus on cumulative impacts in the United States at that time. And community-directed specifically. It was the first time when community groups came together, hired themselves lawyers and engineers, and they determined how this thing was going to actually come about, because community groups actually knew what was where when. You had your mom, your grandma, who knew everything that was in the neighborhood, and so we didn't want someone else to come in and make that determination. We wanted a full-throated investigation of everything in the neighborhood. What we found was that in terms of industrial uses in Bayview Hunters Point, you had shipbuilding, ship repair, ship salvage, ship disposal. You had metalwork, you had the manufacturing of metal, you had salvage yards going on, and you had disposal and recycling. You had 3 solid waste disposal in landfills. We had cement aggregators. We had meat production slaughterhouses, butchering, processing, and fat rendering. We had automotive repair, body shop, salvage, disposal, leaking petroleum storage tanks. And we had technically 3, but officially 2 power plants, plus the water treatment facility. And I want to bring to your attention that all of the ships, all the stuff that revolves around maritime engineering, the building stuff is gone. The basic steel plants are gone, but not salvage and disposal. And we're missing all of the power plants, but we still have the water treatment facility. Everything else on this list is still going on in the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. So just keep that in mind when we're thinking about toxic burdens. all of this stuff was happening then, and most of this stuff is still happening now.
Yeah.
So next slide.
But before we go on, like a personal example, I live right by MLK Pool at 3rd and Carroll, and there's a co-location facility, and then there's another one that went in. And when we were sort of learning about it, and then we had started to fight it, the interesting thing was we actually were talking about this cumulative basis, because each one was saying, oh, yeah, we have diesel generators, but when by ourselves, we are well under the limit. And all the residents sitting there going, well, but when you are together, you're well over the limit. And I think the other thing that really sort of came to pass was, not only did we understood that, but either planning or the city just wasn't willing to deal with that. And that was a major frustration.
To that.
Okay.
We're going to get to that, because when we first did this thing, everybody was like, oh my God, that's a lot. But somewhere around the mid-aughts, all of a sudden, the city planners and industry really came together and created this really sophisticated message that they are trying to throw at us, which is one of the reasons why we need biomonitoring. But yeah, so we'll get to that. That's later on. Yeah, and I'm sorry about that. So this is the toxic inventory that SAGE came up with. As far as I know, there is only one copy, it's a hard copy of this map left. But the result of the SAGE effort was this amazing poster. It was huge. And basically, community in the final meeting about the SF Energy new power plant coming in managed to sneak this in. And when it was our turn to present, we put this map up, and it showed all of the various extremely, extremely, extremely toxic. This isn't even small exposure. This is like heavy industry, heavy hitting toxins. In our neighborhood, all of the sources, these are all producers of these toxins, not just, oh, it's here, or it might have spilled, or the work that these various companies, businesses, organizations, government agencies were doing made all of this toxic stuff. Wow. And dramatically, when it was SAGE's attorney's turn to speak, they threw this map up and they said, here's what's going on in the neighborhood. And by the way, here are the places where people are living right on top of and next door to these places. And how would you feel if you were living in this place? Mm-hmm. And that shocked and scared the supervisors, and that they were like, we need to revisit this. By the way, the original hard copy of this, from what we understand, Dr. Ray Tompkins, very well-known chemist in the community, has done a lot of work specifically around this map and air quality stuff. So he has the original, and it's the only clean copy I could find. I kept trying to find at least decent resolution renderings of this map, and we just don't have it anymore. All the websites that were storing them are now defunct. A lot of the organizations that participated are now defunct. We just relaunched ours. We went silent in 2011, and I just have been relaunching ours since 2015. So, but this map lets you know what's going on in the neighborhood, and the fact that, yeah, we are sitting, breathing, living, eating, praying, staying right in the middle of all kinds of stuff. So next slide.
So number one.
Yeah, go for it.
This is really scary because, I'm seeing a bunch of boxes right by my house on 3rd.
I was just about to say,
right
you see yourself
MLK.
right there, right?
Seriously.
Yes.
Everyone watching this will probably see themselves next to something. And it's really interesting to me because, people want to say, oh, then don't live there, which is just silly. number one, these things were
Who has
placed
a
right
choice?
next to people's homes.
Right,
It wasn't like, oh,
right.
you know, and then if this is the only place, I mean, combine this with redlining. So this was like the only place people got to live.
Literally, exactly,
And then you're like, no, this is
exactly.
not just, you have, other people have choices. A lot of people here don't have choices, and it's their homes. And so I love the fact that you're sharing this, and, you know, and it's a very sort of, you know, visual representation of exactly what you've sort of been talking about. And it gives, I know it gives me pause, you know, as far as things that are going on. I mean, my partner, my friends, and people who are suffering from allergies and things, and we're like, it doesn't make sense at this level. Like, there are allergens in our air. I mean, there's stuff going on. So just really, really
Right,
appreciate you for this.
absolutely. So we did our thing, shocked the supervisors, and then the supervisors decided, oh, maybe we should go back and verify what the community says, because these were scientifically unsophisticated people, right? These are community activists who know what's there, but they don't have the degrees, which at this point I kind of think is a crap excuse. But at that time, okay, so they don't have the degrees to understand what they're talking about. The city supervisors and the mayor charged the US EPA Region 9, San Francisco Department of Public Health, and California's Department of Toxic Substances to go back and verify what we found on our map. And the government index showed 340 businesses handling hazardous waste material that they knew of at that time that were active. So you have a lot of businesses that are legacy polluters and producers that are now defunct, that were defunct, and that have never cleaned up. They're just abandoned. They're like zombie ghost town sites that have never been cleaned up. These findings are for the things that were active between 1994 and 1997 and going on. We had 340 businesses handling hazardous materials. We had 160 of those 340 that were actually generating hazardous materials. We had 100 brownfield sites. And by the way, we had another 260 suspected brownfield sites. And we had 2 Superfund sites. I have one in brackets because that Superfund site was converted into a brownfield site with a subsequent update to the brownfield Superfund regulations. So this is the toxic index that the government found after being forced to take a toxic index by community.
So can you?
Yeah, so all of those spots are there, and government knows they're there.
And so can you share a little bit about what is a brownfield site versus a Superfund site? Or is it just a technical?
Superfund site, so a Superfund site is a site that, this is very crude, it's not technical, so don't quote me on this, but a general, like, from 10,000 feet view, a Superfund site is a site that it's going to take a significant amount of time to clean up, or a significant amount of money to clean up. And so we're talking about things that it would take 500-600 years on its own to clean, if you just left it back to nature, if nature could exist. A brownfield site is a toxic site, but a toxic site that is relatively easy to clean up, meaning it would take about 100 years for us to clean it up.
Oh.
Like, that's the difference. And you can have brownfield versus Superfund in 2 different ways, right? Either brownfield can be, Superfund can be determined because of the sheer volume and length of time that a site was used, which means getting at all of the toxicants is going to be really, really difficult because there's just so much of it. Or you can have some things that are just so toxic that it's almost impossible to deal with. And our shipyard is one of those things. You have some radionuclides that it takes over $100,000 to reach 50% of their original volume. There's no easy, cheap, quick way to fix those things. So those are the differences. A brownfield site is not necessarily any safer than a Superfund site, but realistically, they're equally bad for you.
Yeah. So we're not going to put playgrounds there.
We do all the time, right?
Do we?
Let's talk about one of the Superfund sites that's not listed as a Superfund site because it's still active. Is, you should love this, Mr. CAC. Our San Francisco Public Utilities Commission has acknowledged that if they were to shut down the current wastewater treatment plant, the Southeast Wastewater Treatment Plant, it would immediately become a Superfund site. Even under the more lax regulations, it is a Superfund site. Where the Southeast Community Facility is right now, 1800 Oakdale, when we were discussing community benefits in order to mitigate the hitting a future Superfund site in our neighborhood right next to our houses, which, by the way, half a block from my house, one of the things they wanted to do to mitigate was put a playground there. And we threw a fit. And I do want to add that we threw a fit, so it's not this huge, beautiful park while they're spewing toxins into the air. They do have an amazing daycare center there with a playground, right? So yes, we have put playgrounds on brownfield and Superfund sites. There you go.
Did not know that.
Yes, there you go. So health outcomes as a result of, so these are things that we know actually can be caused by some of the hazards that we know were being produced at that time. And I am trying to be very careful and specific because we haven't done a comprehensive toxic index in a while, and the Advocates is actually seeking funding to redo that. We have some exciting things going on, including around this biomonitoring project, that are going to allow us to go back out and resurvey and redo another toxic index to see what's there now. But some of the health outcomes that can happen because of this, are that you have increased rates of, cardiovascular disease. You have increased rates of diabetes, asthma, bronchitis, COPD, most pulmonary, most lung diseases, cancer, breast and cervical cancer at twice the rate of the Greater Bay Area, particularly in vulnerable populations and populations that are normally protected from breast and cervical cancer. We still have twice the rate of the rest of the Bay Area. So, yeah, putting that together, hey, we have all this extra crap in our neighborhood, and look, we have all these health diseases, and these health outcomes are entrenched in our neighborhood. I do want to say that for a long time, people were saying, oh, it's the poverty of the neighborhood and it's the genetics of the neighborhood that are causing all of these health outcomes. And it's not necessarily the environment or the poverty and the genetics actually create conditions which makes the population more vulnerable, but other populations might not be. The problem with that is, as the rest of the city was gentrifying over the past 2 decades, a lot of the poorer people, a lot of the middle class people, and some of the more affluent people who just can't afford to pay $3 million for a house have been moving in. And on paper, anybody who owns property out here is not poor on paper, right? So how have the ethnicities of the neighborhood changed so dramatically, and yet we still have the same outcomes? We're seeing those newer populations have the same health outcomes. So that's like a huge thing for me, is no, you can't just chalk it up to that. And by the way, have you done those genetic studies? Have you checked back in on those poverty levels to verify? And are you tracking these newer genetic pools, to put it scientifically? And the answer is, if they are, and I know they are, they're not willing to share publicly. They're claiming that they're not. So next slide. Or questions before we move on.
Wow. It is really interesting. I have been in meetings where you sort of, I've either heard or they've alluded to this whole thing, whether it's San Francisco Department of Public Health or other sort of health workers, that somehow the people here are at fault, right? And in fact, given exactly what you said, and this is not the first time that I've heard this, actually. I have heard it like in official studies of folks who are coming in getting very either unusual or higher rates of these exact things. And so that whole idea of, oh, it must be genetic and class related goes right out the window. And what's even sadder is that we actually need other people to get sick before we actually do this, right? And
Thank you.
And for me, it's like one of those things, and I want to make this really clear. I don't want other people to get sick to prove anything.
No.
I want us, and I know you want this too, I want us to look at the facts and go, you know what? This is not okay for anyone. Let's not let this happen. Let's do something different and let's clean it up. Like, that's what an adult would say, and, in our state of evolution, I would hope that we are better, but I still feel like we're playing it like kids trying to do a shell game around the stuff that we know is going on. And we have to see other populations come in and get devastated before anyone's going, oh, maybe those people in the 80s, no, I'm sorry, in the 60s, no, I'm sorry, in the 50s were right the entire time. Like, I mean, come on.
Yeah, and to be clear that I am specifically speaking legacy about at 1994-97, Black folks, we are the Bayview Hunters Point community advocates, which means I am advocating for the newer Asian populations that got forced out of the Richmond district, the newer Latino populations that have been forced out of the Mission district, the Russian population that has been forced out of the Excelsior, and they're all over, but they come here to meet. I'm speaking for them too, except these high rates of diseases, they're specific to the Black population. When we ask about 94124, they say we cannot, there's not enough people in the zip code for us to aggregate data based on that zip code. They're not tracking what's going on with the other ethnicities, and if they are, they're not truly publishing it. But we know these things are happening to them, right? We know the fastest growing population of diabetes patients is Latino. We know it, and they're being moved out of the Mission into the Bayview. So what gives? It's not Black folk anymore. So absolutely.
Yeah, and also for and anyone listening to this, we know that there's a big outmigration of Black and brown folks, which we will definitely be talking about in a future episode.
Yes.
And we also want to connect around that, because if things are happening just because you're not here, you grew up here and you moved out, these things just don't magically go away. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. So I gave you the statistics for 1994 to 1997. Let's fast forward to 2019. Rates of asthma and COPD hospitalizations are highest for Black African Americans, are almost 10 times higher for Blacks than for whites. Among males, death rates due to lung and bronchus, prostate, liver, colon, rectum, pancreatic cancers were 85% to 213% higher for Blacks than all males citywide. All of these are cancers. Female rates of lung, bronchus, breast, colon, and rectum, pancreas, lymphoma, and multiple myeloma cancers were 46 to 132% higher for Blacks as compared to all females citywide. We have all of these cancers just floating around in the neighborhood.
And are we talking, are these stats citywide or specific to Bayview or specific to 94124?
These are actually citywide. And so with some great dispute, I have been quoting these numbers and to city officials, and all of a sudden the official census department changed them. I think city officials forced them to, because we know most of these people are not going to be counted. But unofficially, the neighborhood is now like 42% Asian, 38% Latino, 10% white, and 10% Black. We're figuring that the majority of the Latino population is not going to be counted in the next census. We're figuring that the majority of the Asian population is not going to be counted in the next census. Not just because of the whole immigration question, which is technically not supposed to be on the agenda at all. It shouldn't be in the survey. But we know how little those populations actually like to interface with government, period, right? So they're not going to be counted. And the Black population went from, in just the past 14 months, the Black population went from only 10% of Bayview and less than 2% of the city to back up to about 18% of Bayview and back up to 2.9% of the city. So when you're talking about citywide, 2.9% of the population is Black, and then you're talking about 20% of this neighborhood being Black. You're talking about basically this neighborhood as being Black. There's a handful of legacies in other neighborhoods in the OMI district, in the Fillmore. We're there, you know, Vernal, Portola, Sunnydale, Visitation Valley. But when you're talking about the Black population in San Francisco, it's mostly Bayview. And the only ethnicity for which they break these particular health outcomes is Black. They're not tracing them citywide for other populations based on their zip code. This is one of the ways that they get away with not checking what's going on in Bayview Hunters Point, is by making it the citywide thing, knowing good and well they mean Bayview Hunters Point. And as long as they're doing that, the population of everything else is huge everywhere else and pretty much spread out across the city. So, you know, we don't have to check for Bayview specific. This is, as far as I'm concerned, that's what's going on here.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, and I totally hear you, but, and in addition to what you just said, I mean, this is, I mean, and you pretty much said this also, it's math, right? If Black people are 2% of the population, we're seeing these numbers and most of them live in a particular place, why are we even screwing around with trying to say that it's not directly correlated? If we already know in this particular place, there are particulates, there's, I mean, shipyard radioactivity, there's, you know, the Superfund sites that you just like mentioned, et cetera. Why are we choosing not to make a connection, sort of hide behind the citywide stats as if they're a shield?
Right. It's all a shell game. Most of this stuff is a shell game, right? So this is why we need this. We want to cut straight to the chase.
Yep.
We definitely want to be able to say, nope, here's what's going on and here's why. So next slide. Back one.
Yep. There you go.
Yeah, more health stats for now. Blacks are 30% more likely to die from heart disease and 2 times more likely to have a stroke. The impact of cardiovascular disease in San Francisco is higher among residents in the southeast half of San Francisco, among those who live in households earning less than 300% of the federal poverty level. So again, this is the only place where I could actually have geography linked to health outcomes. And it's saying that basically, if you live in Potrero Hill, Dogpatch, Bayview Hunters Point, or Visitation Valley, you're probably going to end up with heart disease.
Yep.
It's something like 3 times higher for all residents. And you have to take into consideration, they include Potrero Hill and Dogpatch. And you have to recognize that there's the poverty level, but the neighborhood with the second highest income and wealth level in the city is Potrero Hill.
Mm-hmm.
So even with that amount of wealth, we still have this health outcome, right?
Yeah. So it's interesting. I'm almost wondering if the counting of the poverty level is just because that might be the only people that the city has access to. So if you are on Medi-Cal, for example, or some of these other things, are they
right? You're plugged into the system.
Yeah.
And that is the cutoff to make you qualified. So that for me is a good question. And if it was released anytime but in 2018, these numbers were published this spring.
Wow.
So it's data accumulated up through 2018. And because of Obamacare, the state actually has access to all of this information across all California residents, right? That was one of the requirements of Obamacare, was that we start collecting this information for everybody who is receiving medical services. So I think that 300% of the federal poverty level is meant to have people make the exact same assumptions that you made, and throw you off the scent of the fact we're talking about the south corridor of the city. I really do. I think that's the red herring that they put in. All of these, by the way, were taken directly from San Francisco Public Health Department's website on the state of health in the city of San Francisco. Okay. This comes directly from SFDPH. These bullet points come directly from SFDPH. And at the end, I accredit where you can actually go and see these numbers for yourself. So this impact for the south half of San Francisco or quarter of San Francisco, I think they included that 300% as the red herring. So you're not thinking about, hey, this is what's going on in this quadrant.
Yes.
That's my assumption. They can come back and sue me for it, but until they start producing those numbers for me, because they have them, I think that's what's going on. And then this one is really near and dear to my heart. Over the past 10 years, Black African-American mothers had about 4 out of 100 births, but experienced 5 out of 10 maternal deaths and 15 out of 100 infant deaths. So our disparity looks like, and for some counties is worse than the infant and maternal outcomes for people in the Deep South in the state of Mississippi, depending on county. We're bad enough that a year ago, Al Gore came out to talk about the environment, climate change, and in this room in which the Black EJ community was very minimally represented, Al Gore actually stood up and made the comment on the fact that maternal and infant health for San Francisco was among the worst in the country. If I decide to have a baby right now, I have a 50-50 chance of surviving it, literally.
Wow.
So yeah, it's pretty amazing given how wealthy this county is, and given the fact that for almost every other population, all of these things, cancer rates, cardiovascular rates, pulmonary, lung disease, all of that stuff is going down and improving for every other group in this city but Black folks. We're not necessarily getting worse, we're just staying the same while everybody else gets better. So, yep. And I love this. Kevin Grumbach, along with the current medical officer for the county, Tomas Aragon, and others, did an initial study on health outcomes in Bayview, which actually spurred a community survey, which was groundbreaking and has become the gold medal standard for how you do these kinds of community health studies. And at the time, Kevin Grumbach was head of family and community medicine. He still is. He's pretty amazing. We had to educate him a lot. He learned some painful lessons by getting beat up by community with some of his assumptions. And in the final paper that his group released in 2006, a reporter actually asked him what he thought was the reason there were all of these weird diseases that most of them were endemic to the affluent at the time. And all of a sudden you had all these poor Black people in Bayview having them. And his quote is, "It's hard to say one factor is the biggest problem, but I would not be averse to saying the environment is a smoking gun." You put this next to that map earlier in the presentation, and you kind of have to agree with him, right?
Yeah. There's a lot here.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to sort of touch base on like next steps. I think one of the things that I want to do is, one, Michelle, you shared that there's going to be a meeting or a structure. What's going on around sort of biomonitoring?
So we just received a notice that we are finalists for a Packard grant of around in September to help us with some basic governance of how we want to interact with the scientific community. I have to say that one of the strongest proponents of this, now one of the leaders of this project, was Dr. Ahimsa Porter Samshai, who has been calling for, oh, I'm sorry, I took out the, so I did have a slide. I'm really sorry I didn't leave it in. And that slide actually discussed the fact that one of the ways, and I promised you we were going to get to this, one of the ways that particularly government, but because of that, industry and bad actors have been getting around actually dealing with what's in our environment and health outcomes, is somewhere around the mid-2000s, we started hearing this thing about, well, there's so much there that you can't link it to one source. And all of a sudden, somewhere around 2010, 2011, we started actually having things come to a standstill and stop because of this argument. There's so much out there. You can't prove one of these things did it. And because you can't prove one of these things did it, we're going to act like none of these things did it until you can link it to a single source. We're just going to keep permitting like crazy and building like crazy and manufacturing like crazy. You can't prove it's us, so we don't have to stop. Recently, with the India Basin planned development, basically we had planning, the developers, and the air district show up and say, well, if you actually wanted us to remain within significant levels of concerns for air quality, we wouldn't be allowed to build anything in the city. And so we don't see why us permanently raising air quality levels to significance of concern should stop this project. Like, these are the things that are being said, right? So basically, you want to prove that something is causing harm. Look inside of our bodies at this point, because we do know what's in the soil. Everybody has acknowledged what's in the soil. We do kind of know what's in the air. Everybody has acknowledged what's in the air. We need to prove that it's in our bodies and that it needs to stop. And we need to start looking at different economic models to say, yes, this will cost the manufacturer this amount of money, and this will cost us this number of jobs, which will hurt the economy this way. But this will save us how much money in negative health outcomes? How expensive is it to treat a lot of these things that we discussed? Think about how much it costs to treat people with any kind of cancer, and then think about how many novel cancers we have that are just so rare going on in this neighborhood, and how expensive it is to treat that stuff. And let's start comparing those numbers to each other to make the determination of, is it economically sound to continue to do nothing about this or allow this stuff to expand, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I really did want to address that, and thank you for bringing that up, because that's basically what you were victim to when they were talking about putting the co-location plants out there, right?
Absolutely.
Or adding, more aggregating sites for the construction dirt that's out there right by you.
Yeah.
It's just one of those, we know it's there, but we can't prove that any one of them did you harm. And so they have totally removed the concept of cumulative impact again. And we fought for 20 years to get that to the table. Mm-hmm. And now we're reverting again. I don't know that our planning department itself actually has the sophistication around the concept to deal with it, but they certainly have the PR firms with the sophistication around the language to justify not dealing with it. Yeah. And I'm very sorry that you guys fell victim to it. But so getting back to next steps, we are currently meeting with UCSF about some funding as well. Ahimsa is an MD. She does a lot of work around internal medicine, holistic medicine, nutrition, metabolic syndrome. And so she worked out an agreement on behalf of our community to do some basic tests. They're called the Genova kit. They're urinalysis. You pee in a cup. We send it off to the labs, and they characterize over 300. She signed us up for the kit that will characterize over 300 different species in the blood. So we're looking for a specific set of radionuclides for all of us, but especially for those of us who live fence line to the shipyard and its various landfill sites. We're also looking at a lot of what are called volatile organic compounds, pesticides, those kinds of things, heavy metals. She's also doing something that's very interesting with her kids. She's doing nutritional profiles to see if you are lacking in any nutrients that are needed, necessary. And that's for a couple of reasons. We are a food desert. We don't necessarily have access to all of the fresh produce that we need. And when we do, it's rather expensive. But the other thing is some of these toxic substances, and particularly some of these radioactive species, actually put a burden on the body, which does not allow the body to absorb some of the critical nutrients. So even those things that we can't specifically link because they don't stay in the body long enough, there might be these biomarkers showing that they have passed through based on those nutrient profiles as well. So very exciting stuff, but we're also possibly going to work on bringing in some other labs doing this kind of work, including University of California, San Francisco, and the Office of Environmental Health and Hazards with Cal Department of Public Health. And so we're creating this steering committee in order to allow us to maintain control of where this project goes. There's a lot of really deep, really cutting edge, really complicated science behind this. We want to make sure that community understands fully what's going on with this stuff. We want to make sure community retains control of every step of this process, number one, and more particularly retains control of their samples and their data, which has not traditionally happened for both Black and Native American communities in this country. And so that's what this steering committee is. We'll have a bare bones steering committee by mid-September, and hopefully build that out through the end of the year, and be really directing some traffic in this project, really be ready to go by the beginning of the year. The Advocates is also creating what I like to call, that most people would not characterize it as, but as a shadow board of supervisors for Bayview Hunters Point, a community council. Unlike the board of supervisors, we are dedicated to actually training them in all the complex things that go into planning systems for urban areas. So we have a city planner from Detroit coming in to train around that and around GIS mapping, so that almost any kind of mapping application or software can upload our data and immediately show visually what's going on in the neighborhood. We hope to link that to the biomonitoring program, the toxic index, the air quality program, which we'll be talking about in our next podcast, as well as some other things that are going on. We have some professors from Stanford and amazing archivists slash documentarians, and some amazing community activists who are going to train our council in how to do sociological, anthropological level first-person story gathering and archiving in order to link our communities, our residents, long-term residents, people who have moved, people who have just come in, their histories of what was going on in the neighborhood, and link that to the stuff that's not necessarily there now, but might be affecting those soil samples that we take, or those air blitz that we measure, so on and so forth, but also to document the history, since the neighborhood is changing so fast, and really create that data bank. We'll also have a couple of the people from this council become the curators slash librarians for our digital library on the shipyard. So obviously a lot of topics to come up in the next year and a half, right, around all of this stuff. But basically, we want to have that one-stop resource for community members to go to if they want a more in-depth look at what's going on across the city and the region that affects them directly. And And we're really interested in taking legacy residents to man this council, reentry people, current college students, our elders. We have quite a few elders who are still around who probably have more cognitive facilities than I do. I mean, some of these people, some of the centenarians are just incredible people. And so we really want to make sure we're tapping into every aspect of the community and have that council informing the steering committee on biomonitoring to make sure that we, number one, are asking the right scientific questions when we're going to build out this research, that we are monitoring for the right chemical species at the right times, because sometimes those things don't show up. Doesn't mean you weren't exposed and it didn't have an effect on your body. However, if you get a negative response in any one of these tests, the people who want to continue life as usual will show up and start doing bad things and saying, yeah, but look, the community's thing said it was fine, right? Well, no, it wasn't fine. We just tested at the wrong time. And so we want to make sure that all of these things get taken into account and reflected. We also want to control how the research across all of these projects actually gets disseminated, and make sure that our community participants across the spectrum get credited for it, right? So those are our next steps.
I love it. I'm a big believer in research justice. That really is all the concept that community owns, the research that is done there, because that research is used by others to justify their own policy decisions and frameworks. So I love what you're doing around, hey, how can we as a community actually own this, that we can own that narrative, not only, as our stories, but also our data. So thank you so much for that. And I'm looking forward to we're going to re-engage around this. I think this was a real sort of educational piece. I know it is for me. Like I said, you will definitely sort of be having that first sort of steering committee in September. We'll love to know more, be kept abreast. We totally want to know when the first things are, when you're going to be doing solicitations. One Bayview sort of wants to help get the word out so we can get a broad cross section of folks that you want to take these tests. I know in the short term, if you have a story about biomonitoring or pollution or anything we talked about, go ahead and email us at community@onebayview.com. We are clearly, with our new website, going to be aggregating events around this. Anything to do with sort of environmental justice. We want to work with you, Michelle, and everyone else sort of in the EJ space. And just so you know, I'm also on the California Democrat sort of environmental caucus. And I think what was really interesting is I'm going to be bringing a lot of this stuff sort of forward, because I think you have a lot of people who do believe in climate change, who do believe in climate, and they don't necessarily know about this stuff, and they do.
Right.
And so I think there are a lot of avenues that we haven't as a collective tapped into yet. So I'm looking even forward to that. And of course, we want to include any updates that you have in our newsletter to get it out to as many people as possible. We're here to really support what you're doing, and what the broader coalition is doing. So just thank you so much for being part of this. And as Michelle promised, we don't sort of put things forward. And I know Michelle definitely believes in this, doesn't put these forward without it being backed up. Right. And so, please don't take our word for it. Here's the information that you can see for yourselves. Go ahead and read, go ahead and find it, and read for yourself, because I think it's going to be really important that we all get educated about this. And I'm just going to say this, some of you might not like it. This is not Fox News, right? I don't know if I don't know if you know. I don't know if you noticed, but
challenge me. Yes, anything that's incorrect or inaccurate, please come back and challenge me.
Yep. And this is what it's all about. It's about us getting the information that we need. It's about you being willing to share, because I know it's been a fight. We've talked a little bit about this. It's been a fight just to get the information that is out there. that suddenly evaporates and you're like, what's going on? So I just want to say thank you so much for all of this today.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Ahimsa has written op-eds and actual articles on this extensively. I will get her to agree to share some of that with your members. Anybody who wants to read this stuff, I will make sure at least a link gets posted to Bayview as biomonitoring information comes out, for sure. Thank you so much for providing the forum.
Thank you again. And for everyone out there, we just want to say thank you. Please take the next steps with us. It's really important. And we will see you next time. Bye-bye.